Welcome. Welcome to Liberty Common High School. My name is Will Denton.
I'm James Conradi.
We're school leaders at Liberty Common High School. Just like to welcome you. So here's our names. So I'd like to introduce one of our school captains, Joe Caraway. Right now Jesse Zuniga is sick, so he couldn't make it, but Joe will tell you a little about himself.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming tonight. This is great. We're really packing it in. So I'm one of the school leaders here. I'm the head of the whole house system. Basically we'll talk more about the house system, but this school offers a lot of leadership opportunities, lots of public speaking like tonight, whatnot. So kids that come to the school are very well brought up in public speaking and school leadership and are made to be leaders in their community. So the other school captain is sick tonight. He couldn't be here, but we hope you guys, thanks for coming. I hope you guys have a good night. Mr. Schaefer is going to talk about some philosophy, whatnot. We hope you guys enjoy it. With that, I'm going to hand it back to these two leaders, and they're just going to be bringing you through tonight and getting some practice of public speaking. And also, when we're all done, they're going to be staying around to tour you guys through the school and talk about what the school means to them. So with that, I'll hand over to these guys.
Thanks, Joe.
You know what? That device is missing. So he's going to see if he can find it.
Yeah, so we'll just run you through kind of a brief overlay of tonight. So we just did the introduction. Mr. Bob Schaefer is going to give, I think, a more full introduction of Liberty Common High School, what Liberty's about, a little history and philosophy of what Liberty has, where it started, what it's become. Really interesting story. In fact, why charter schools and why Liberty? Charter schools are not that common, and Liberty Common is not a common charter school, so I'm going to talk about that in depth. Mr. Bob Schaefer is going to talk about the core knowledge curriculum, which has become actually more well known, but he's going to explain the philosophy of that, why it works, and why we teach that here at Liberty, and go over Liberty's curriculum too. Character education, something that we value here at the school a lot. Up here we have capstones. If you can't read them right now, but Mr. Bob Schaefer will talk about that today. And then some high school facts, just give you an overlay of what goes on in the high school day to day. So, yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Bob Schaefer, if you could give me a hand.
Let's see if we can fix this here. There we go. There we go. We have technology now. Thank you, guys. Can everybody hear me okay? In the back, you can hear fine? Good. Well, as these guys mentioned, my name is Bob Schaefer. I'm the principal here at Liberty Common High School, and I've been here for about 5 years. And so in this building, we have 7th through 12th grade. And at our elementary school, which is about a mile over the hill that way, we have K through 6. So if you came for one of the public information nights because you're interested in getting your kindergartner through 11th grader into this school, then you are here for the right evening. Mrs. Stolzfus is going to explain a little bit later, toward the end of our presentation, how our lottery system works, and if you're on that, if you're registered in that lottery, why coming tonight is important. Before we get to all the nuts and bolts details about that, we're going to go through this presentation, and I want to not apologize so much, but I just want maybe fair warning. This is not a short presentation. It lasts about an hour and a half. This part of it, and so this evening we have targeted to last 2 hours overall, and so we should be finished at about 8:30, even starting a little bit late. I'll just talk fast and zip through this. This presentation, by the way, is kind of ordered up by our board of directors, and I'll get to why our board is critical in the organization of the school as well. But essentially, we want to make absolutely sure that if you send your kids to Liberty, or if you register your kids on our lottery list, that you really want to send your kids to Liberty. and you understand why the school succeeds and what our philosophy is. Because some people do see the high test scores and they see the results and they see the success in getting our kids prepared to succeed in college, and they just think that if you just send your kid here, that will all be great. And that's not the way the program works. There is a deliberate philosophy of the school, which is different than you'll find out in most public schools. There are a set of expectations about the school and how students behave and the homework and the curriculum, which is different as well. And so all of that we think is very positive. I myself am a parent. I've got 3 kids who have already gone through Liberty and before we had a high school. And since we've added the high school, which was just 5 years ago, we're in our 5th year now, I've got 2 kids who are here. One's a senior and one is a freshman. And so obviously, if you haven't figured out already, just from the tone of my voice and my general enthusiasm, I love what we're doing here, and I love the results, and I'm a customer myself. So many of us who work here are, and the school is run by the parents who make decisions, for the best interest of their own kids, and presumably for everybody else who comes here as well, and it's been a great formula. All right, so we're going to start off talking about the history of the philosophy. This was the headline of in a newspaper advertisement, "Revolution in Education," back in the mid-1990s. There were many of us in town who were frustrated somewhat with the regular public schools in the Poudre School District. At the time. So again, we're going back to the mid-90s. And so I'll just tell you my personal story quickly. And that is my oldest kids of 5 are twin girls. And so we were prepared to go to the local school district and or the neighborhood school and enroll our kids. And we did. And so we went to twin girls. One was in Class A, another one was in Class B. And it wasn't very long before we realized that student A was learning at a pretty accelerated rate, and student B was learning something else, and not learning at quite the rate. And so we went to the principal and said, how can this be, where we have 2 kindergartners, one's learning this way, and one's learning that way, isn't the curriculum coordinated? And the principal said, well, no, we hire professional educators, they know what they're doing, and so you shouldn't second guess what they are trying to do in the classroom. They are experts. And so we weren't satisfied with that. And so we started chatting with others in the community and the neighborhood, and then we saw this headline, and it was put in an advertisement in the Colorado newspaper by somebody else on the north end of town, opposite where we lived, and they just wanted to draw people together to talk about what we ought to do as parents and just ordinary citizens about education. And so we went and met with the author of that. His name was Dr. Randy Everett. You'll meet him in my slide presentation in a minute. And he was just gathering people together to talk. And we started meeting in Dr. Everett's living room. And we were just from different walks of life within the community. At the time, I was a Colorado State Senator and I ran my own business. And my wife is an electrical engineer. And so that's the expertise we had about education, other than we kind of thought it was our responsibility as parents to do whatever we could to make sure our children were receiving the best education possible. And that's what the rest of this little group agreed on. So we were not experts on curriculum or how to build a school or anything like that yet. So we committed ourselves to going down to anybody remember the Stone Lion bookstore, which is downtown? I think there's a pizza, Bojo's Pizzas in there now. It used to be a bookstore. And so we went to the Stone Lion bookstore and we bought every education book on the education shelf, 2 rows. And we brought them back to the Everett's living room and started handing them out like a deck of cards. You read this, you read that, you read... And so we read books over the course of the next month or so and came back to these meetings and just had these great discussions, started narrowing based on agreement, started narrowing to our appreciation of ideas that seemed to make the most sense, and it ultimately moved us in the direction of the curriculum that we're going to discuss tonight, the philosophy about the school, and an epic revolution in public education here in northern Colorado. So here's a quick history. Again, in the 1990s, Dr. Everett and Ruth Ann began with this idea. These are the key ideas we narrowed our agreement down to. And first and foremost, that parental choice ought to be an essential part of education. That there ought to be a core curriculum of specified content and knowledge. that a solid content-driven instruction made the most sense. We wanted to teach our kids the values of a democratic society. And we thought that the closer to the school you could locate the management of that school, the better the decisions would be on behalf of kids in that school. Now the school district started seeing, we didn't keep it a secret, we invited school board members at the time to some of our meetings, and a couple of them came and were very sympathetic to our discussions. The size of our group started to grow. We couldn't fit in the Everett's living room anymore, so we started calling the just neighborhood schools, regular public schools, and renting their gymnasiums. And so those groups started getting bigger. We outgrew elementary-sized gymnasiums and started moving into the junior high-sized gymnasiums. And the school district started sending people to our meetings. And they thought, if you looked around the room, they saw a Colorado State Senator, they saw Dr. Everett, who was a bishop in the Mormon Church, and there were other significant community leaders around town, and the school district thought that we were launching a political effort. And that our goal was to maybe run a slate of candidates and take over the district. Well, that was not our intention at all. We really didn't want to do that. All we wanted to do was engage in a bigger and bigger community conversation so that as a function of consensus, we might come to the same ideas about what makes the most sense for our kids. But this building, some of you may recognize it. It's the old Washington Elementary School. It's over on Shields and around maybe Oak Street, over in that area. Shields and Oak Street was shut down. It was condemned. There's an asbestos problem in there that the district didn't think was acceptable for everybody else's kids, but they thought it was perfect for ours. So they told us we could have this condemned building. And so, and which is really what we wanted. They said, just go there, and all you people who think you know something about education, you can pretend to run a school, and someday you'll fail, and you can come on back to us, but we will let you have that building. So we moved in there, and we started with 125 students in grades K through 4 in that first year, and we just continued to grow with that leading class. But the big message, even though there's only 125 students, because that's how much room was in the school for the grades that we had planned there, there were 800 more on top of that signed up on our waiting list to get into the school. So that sent shockwaves through the school district that maybe they ought to be concerned about what's being taught and how they manage schools. So we did expand, and we did manage to find a way to get more of the kids off that waiting list into our school and continue to grow with that 4th grade lead class. And in 1995, the Fort Collins High School moved out of its iconic building there on College Avenue, and we moved into the south half of it and continued to grow as a school, and our waiting list continued to grow as well. We went well over 1,000 people on the waiting list, and somewhere around 600 kids were in that school at the time, K through 9th grade by the time we filled out that there. We were there for a couple of years. And then, well, before we get into that, so here's what happened. And this starts getting us into the discussions of what's different about our school. And I try to describe it in a positive way for us. My goal tonight is not to bash or suggest other schools are bad, but there is a reason we went the way we went in our history here. And it started with management of the staff and the personnel. So we were we were a district public school, but we were an alternative school. So our line of accountability went right to the Cooter School District Board of Education. Within the district, then, as is the case now, there are teachers that are called excess. I keep forgetting the second half of that term. Tenured excess teachers. Tenured excess teachers. Now, these are teachers principals don't want for a variety of reasons. They're not bad to the extent that they could be fired, but they're bad in that no principal wants them. They keep getting moved around from building to building. And so the district saw this as the perfect solution to their excess capacity teachers. And so they started assigning teachers to us as our school was growing. And these were teachers that tended to be near retirement, and they knew they only had a couple or 3 years left to go. And so learning a new curriculum, this curriculum's kind of complicated, it is ambitious, it's fast-paced. Learning all of that was not their interest. They just needed a place to teach until they retired. And we ended up getting stuck with about 5 of these teachers. The district just told us, you're going to take them. It wasn't enough to destroy the school, but we could see the writing on the wall that we couldn't succeed very long, and we weren't going to do the best job we possibly could for all of our kids if we were going to keep getting assigned to us these teachers that didn't believe in our program. So about this time, the charter school law was passing through the state legislature. I was a sponsor of that in the state senate, and I was a member of the education committee at the time. And so I was enthusiastic about that, and partially because I knew how it could work. So the charter school law passed. It took 2 years. And it passed in 1994, but in 95, we were actually the first school in Colorado to apply for a charter. We were not the first to get one, because our battle took about 3 years. And so we applied for a charter, and the district tried to call us off. And they said, don't go this charter route, all you Liberty people, Washington people we were called then. Don't go the charter route. What you should do is take this new offer we're going to give you. It's a real bargain. We just built a brand new elementary school for a neighborhood south of town, and we will take it away from them and give it to you if you'll just not charter. And so our parent population disagreed on whether we should take that deal or whether we should charter. And as it turned out, we had about 1,400 families on our waiting list. So let's see, we had about 600 kids in the school. We had enough families to do both. And so we did. So half of us decided to go the charter route. The other half went to a different school, to that neighborhood school. So we applied for the charter in 1995. It was denied by the school district. We appealed to the State Board of Education, and we won down there. But when you win, all they do is send it back to the district and say the district made the wrong decision for a variety of reasons. District, now you must reevaluate that application and narrow your differences or your disagreements to those few issues. So they did that, or we did that. We went to the board meeting. They were so happy in March. They were smiling, and they said, congratulations, we're going to approve the charter, a charter for Liberty Common School. And when we opened up the charter, it was a different charter. They rewrote what we applied for, and they approved their own program and wanted us to take it, which we couldn't do. It was not anything close to what we ended up with and what we were proposing. So we had to appeal again to the State Board of Education. The district responded by suing the parents. They sued us by name for going through this application process. Some of us are still mad about that. Now all those board members are long gone, and our relationship with the current school board is just fine. So we're talking, back 1996. But so yeah, they're all gone now. But none of us forget that. What we had to go through to get the school open. There is a plaque over on the wall at the elementary school, which is kind of behind a coat rack, and everybody walks right past it and doesn't see it. But a lot of our names are on there, those who were sued. And also, when we finally got to getting our school open, we didn't have money. We needed to borrow money. And so there was a list of us that, just people like you, we put the equity in our homes up for collateral for the loan to open up the school. And so I point to that list of names because it helps explain the attitude you're going to start hearing now. And that is, when you get sued and the cost of failure is that you lose your house, you do everything you possibly can to make sure your school not only doesn't fail, but that it succeeds. And so, and we're kind of happy warriors about that. And we're very proud about that. And we're still mad about being sued. So the Board of Education advised us to attempt to open the school again, and they did approve the next state step of the charter, but they did so with so many restrictions it made it impossible for us to open the school. It made it too expensive. We couldn't meet their deadlines for their reports that they needed and everything they wanted up front. So it was dead. We announced we weren't going to be able to open the school. They dropped their lawsuit against us. And then we refused to give up. So we started all over again, applied again, had to go back to the State Board of Education. They were on our side, and the district realized that we were utilizing the law as it was written and as it was intended, and that we were probably eventually going to win. So they started cooperating. In February of '97, they approved the charter. And that gave us just a few months to find a place to put a school. And we opened up we bought the old Vicon toothpaste factory, made toothpaste and mouthwash over in the industrial park over there on Prospect and Spec Point and Sharp Point Drive. And so we bought that, and it smelled like toothpaste and mouthwash for about 5 years. We raised the money and did a miraculous job getting a school open and actually getting kids in there before the school was finished. But we got in there with grades K through 7 and opened the school in September of 1997. All right, that's the background on how Liberty came to be. So in 97, half of those Washington Corps families that I mentioned that wanted a charter went to the new charter. That's the factory turned into a school right there. And the other half went to that brand new school that the district built for this neighborhood. And they took it from them, gave it to us. And the other half of the families went over there. That's Trout Core Knowledge School. That's the history of Trout. Since our very first year over there, we went up in kindergarten through 9th grade. We were one of the state's top performing schools in every category, really. And, let's go back again. And so people wanted to send their kids there. The waiting list grew to 1,800 families. We had about 800 in the school. Our waiting list was 1,800 families wanting to get in. And so we didn't want to expand the school. I'll get into the philosophy on why we don't want to grow and grow and grow. But we said, well, we'll work with all of you families. Let's start another school just like Liberty. And so we helped start Ridgeview. Ridgeview is not just like Liberty, but it's a lot like Liberty. They use the same core knowledge curriculum, classical liberal arts. Ridgeview started with a K through 12 school right off the bat. And so that's where the impetus from that waiting list, as well as some other people who had a vision for creating Ridgeview, that's where Ridgeview started. So we regard Ridgeview as a sister school and very close friends, as we do Trout, and we cooperate with these other schools in a variety of ways. Teacher exchanges, curriculum exchange, various ways to cooperate with these other schools. So we opened the high school here. This is what you see, the building you're in right now. And that's what it looked like when we opened it. You probably can't tell if you're not that familiar with it, but the school is a lot smaller there as it is now in terms of square footage. So we moved grades 7 through 10. Moving 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, plus the brand new 10th grade over here, allowed us to expand the K through 6 program by 50%. So we had 60 kids per grade. And starting in 2010, we have 90 kids per grade. And we're never going to get any bigger than that, by the way. We just don't believe that, we think that you start losing some efficiencies, but you really start losing your contact connection with the kids. When we have a meeting and we're discussing a student who's having either a scheduling problem or maybe an academic problem, or maybe it's not a problem, we're just discussing course selection for a student, it's a great thing when you see 6 or 7 teachers, counselors, administrators sitting in a room together, and we know exactly which child we're talking about. We know that child's personality, we know about his siblings, we know about his or her family, we know a lot about that kid because we have been with that child all the way since whenever he might have started here, or she, and we're not so big that we lose touch. We stand, Mr. Lovely, the assistant principal, and I, and some of the other teachers, we stand at the door in the mornings and welcome the kids in, and we pretty much know them all by name. And we don't want to lose that. So that's one of the reasons we're never going to get bigger than 90 kids per grade. So why a charter school? All right, another story. So when I was a kid, how many kids we got here? How old are you? 14. All right. When I was 14, and my mom said, Bobby, so she was allowed to call me that then, you're not. Many of my students in here, they love you. Bobby, time to go to the post office. My brother Jimmy and I and my little sister Jane, we would start whining and crying, Mom, no, to the post office. And why? Because a trip to the post office was a 1-hour adventure minimum. Okay? And why? Because that was the only place you could go to get your mail delivered. It was illegal for anybody else to do it, frankly. They had a complete nation, border-to-border, coast-to-coast monopoly on delivering mail. And so you knew that when you went to the post office because there would be big long lines through turnstiles And you'd go way down to one end of the room, up to the other end of the room for that one person behind the desk to sell you the stamps or weigh you the package or whatever it is you needed. And it was awful. And it was always like that. You could drive to another post office and it was the same version of the same thing. But it isn't that way anymore. Along comes all kind of competition, right? Now there's multiple ways to get your packages and your letters delivered, and the best, of course, is electronic. Now the message that it used to take me 2 or 3 days to put it in the mail, have it get across the state or across the country, now it happens in a matter of seconds. And it's reliable, and it happens easily. And so what do we know about the post office today? All you kids, you have to listen to this history story from me about what the post office was like, because the postal service today is pretty good. It's frankly not that expensive if you think of the cost to have human beings and some technology take a letter from here, and it'll make it across the country in a day or two. And it usually gets there. I mean, when I was a kid, there was this little meeting in the street of all the moms in my neighborhood. And we'd all go to the mailbox, and whoever was there first to get their mail, they'd look through it, and you're looking through to see if you've got Mrs. Jones's mail in your mailbox, because you usually did, or somebody else in the street. So there'd be this little social gathering as everybody's getting their mail to the right recipient. Now that doesn't happen anymore. You usually, well, it happens occasionally, but you usually get the right mail. And why is that? Well, it's right there. Because competition is a good thing. It causes us all to get better, or we go out of business. And that's one of the reasons this school succeeds and thrives, because we will go out of business if we stop doing a good job and people want to send their kids somewhere else. And that is very different. It's a whole different mindset and mentality than you find in other schools. So I used to be chairman of the State Board of Education as well. That was most recently. And just what happens is if there's a bad school in inner city Denver or Pueblo or Colorado Springs or even here in Fort Collins, and if it's a regular public school and they go to the policymakers and say, hey, we've got a big failure rate or we can't close our achievement gap, the answer of political people is, well, let's give them more money. If that happens here, they say, let's shut you down and let somebody else run the school. So anybody recognize that guy? Anyone? What's that? E.D. Hirsch? No? Nope, that's Milton Friedman, Nobel laureate economist. He would have been 104 years old this year. We know this because we celebrate Milton Friedman's birthday every year. Milton Friedman gives us $1,000 to throw a birthday party from the grave. He gives us $1,000 to throw a party for him. And he left the foundation behind, and every year on his birthday, schools can apply to get a $1,000 grant to have a school choice event of some sort. And so we have our grandparents club, and they spend the money and invite a speaker in, and we all go listen to somebody talk about the economic virtues of choice in education. And so, here's a guy who was so successful in life, and not just in compelling ideas, but also financially successful, that he's still making great contributions to public education. But he was an economist at heart, but he did focus quite. You would know him from monetary policy and free trade and a variety of issues. But he was also a champion of school choice and vouchers and tuition tax credits and so on. But he had this cost-quality matrix that he applied to everything. Not just education, but it makes a lot of sense in education. So here's how this works. You start in the upper right corner up there. Oops, wrong one. You know what? It took me, I burned like an hour in my office trying to get that box. So there we go. Everybody should admire that. I spent trying to figure out how to make that happen. So that box reads this way. And follow me on this. This is really a great little model and a great economics lessons for all you students here. It says, if I spend my money on you, I care about the cost more than I care about the quality. Follow me? If I'm spending my money on you, I care about what it costs. I don't care so much about the quality. The opposite here makes as much sense. If you're spending your money on me, I care about the quality now much more than I care about what you're spending. I only care about the quality. If you're buying me a new car, a new coat, new shoes, I want the best because it's your money, right? The worst of all worlds is right here. And that's when you have a scenario where you give somebody the opportunity to spend your money on you. Because there is no motivation to care about the cost or the quality. It really isn't. Now, people may be altruistic and they might care, but there's no day-to-day serious motivation to watch the pennies, and make sure that they're being spent in the most efficient way to derive as much, the most quality that you can. And what have I described right here, by the way? Situations where you're allowing other people to spend your money on you. It'd be a lot of things. That'd be a long list. But it certainly includes public education generally. And then the best of all worlds is this box over here. And that is where we have a scenario where you get to spend your money, on you. It's the only circumstance under which, according to Friedman, that you have day-to-day constant motivation and pressure to have high quality and low cost, where you're going to care about the cost as much as you are the quality. And you'll make good market-based decisions. Now, charter schools move us in this direction. Charter schools are not that, by the way. We still use public funds. We're still spending your money on you, but you have a little more control here. The district's spending, and the state is spending your money on you. But you have a little bit more control here because it only comes here if you want it to. It only comes here if you decide this is where you're going to send your student to learn. If you make the decision to send your student somewhere else, the money goes with that student. And if we don't succeed as an enterprise, we don't succeed in our community mission, our mission to serve our community, and we don't succeed in our goal to provide the best possible education that we can design. So things that would be further in this direction would be homeschooling, private education, and other things. But we're a giant step in that direction, and our board and all of us who work here constantly make decisions to try to move us more and more in that direction. We realize that when parents are engaged, when they are making decisions about everything from your schedule to being involved as a parent on our board, making policy decisions for the school, we're going to care a lot more about the cost, and we're going to be making better decisions about the quality of the education. So let me give you two examples, just to show contrast. The first is this chart. You don't have to see all the details, but you'll get the picture instantly. So this is a chart of the steps you need to go through in the state of Colorado to remove an unsatisfactory teacher from a regular public school classroom. Okay? There's a lot of bubbles, and it's 5 panels. 5 panels of bubbles and boxes and flowcharts on here. It takes about 3 years, and it costs about $1 million to go through this process. And so most school administrators are going to make an easier decision. If it's an excess capacity teacher, let's say, you just move them around, or you do what Denver does, and they actually have office space on the upper floor of their headquarters, their district headquarters, called the rubber room, and they just put those people there with no real job, because it's cheaper to continue to pay them until they retire than it is to go through this. Now, this is assuming that a teacher wants to contest their being removed every step of the way. If you have somebody who hurts a student, for example, even in regular public schools, it's easier to remove them. Now, we're not anxious to remove teachers from our school. We don't make many bad decisions here when it comes to hiring. We have a very, very thorough and exhaustive interview process before we hire anyone. But when we've made a mistake, we don't make it for long. And our process is 1 or 2 steps, and I can get it done by tomorrow. Okay? And frankly, on those occasions when we've, in our history going back to 1997, on the rare occasions when we've had to let somebody go, it was never a surprise. Our observation process, our feedback on performance evaluation was so transparent and so clear and so obvious that by the time we had to have the hard decision, the 2 times I've had to do it in the last 5 years here, the teacher kind of said, yeah, I knew that was coming. And that's fair, frankly. That's more fair than you get out in most of public education, frankly. So we don't make these mistakes for long. And here, by the way, I don't want to dwell on this one either, but here's 5 more panels of flowcharts and bubbles. There's even more bubbles and flowcharts here. This is what it takes to get rid of a disruptive student from your school in Colorado. And it takes a lot of money. If somebody wants to contest it all along the way, it takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. So given that the strategy of most public education is is kindergarten through 6th grade in an elementary school, 7th and 8th, sometimes 9th grade in a junior high or middle school, 4 years of high school or 3 years of high school. Most principals will make the decision that, well, you know, he's only going to be here 2 more years. Let's just endure it, pass him along from grade to grade and get him out of here. Let the next principal deal with that. This is a K through 12 school. There's nobody else to deal with that here. And so we do everything we can to correct the situation, but I've never expelled a student. I told a family I was going to start the process, and it had to do with a theft, a felony theft. And the family decided that it would probably be in their better interest just to move on. So that's the closest we've ever come. But I don't have to deal with these lengthy rules when it comes to faculty, any staff, and I don't have to deal with it. And by the way, that's any charter school. And I don't have to go through all that nonsense when it comes to somebody who is robbing the rest of the students in the classroom from receiving a good education. So those are the 2 quick examples. So answers to what we try to do to get in that lower left box of allowing you to spend your money on you. Create marketplaces in education wherever possible. Treat parents like real customers. Treat educators like real professionals. And demand agreement on the universal truth of public education. And this is it right here. That it is the right and responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. Okay? That seems so simple, doesn't it? Everybody looks at this and says, I can agree with that. But let me assure you, this is not universally embraced in public education. It is not universally embraced in public policy, whether it's education or insurance or many other things. And even people who tell me they agree with this, when we come to some of the hard decisions, really don't fully embrace this. They expect somebody else is going to take the responsibility for raising their children or someone else's. And so we have to have agreement on this premise here in the school. In fact, we believe that as parents, and I'm speaking not as principal, but as parent of Sarah and Mary, that it is my responsibility, my wife Maureen, to educate Sarah and Mary. And it's your responsibility to educate your child. And you hire us as a school and as our professor, you hire us to assist you in your responsibility to educate your kids. And we do a good job of helping and assisting. But we won't do it for you without you. It just can't work. It can't work here, and it can't work anywhere else, by the way. And when it's tried, it never works. So we have a legitimate partnership here at the school predicated upon this philosophy, which I know sounds very simple and sounds so obvious. But let me assure you, after years in public policy as a state senator, a U.S. congressman, and a member of the State Board of Education, and as principal of the school, it is difficult. It takes effort to maintain fidelity to this vision. So, revolution in education, reaching agreement on the terms of liberty's revolutionary philosophy. We're going to start walking through on the things we tend to agree with as parents when it comes to educating our kids here at this school. We picked the word common. At a common school, students of all ages and socioeconomic backgrounds could obtain a common education. And we picked the name Liberty because it suggested that for the first time, parents would now have educational choice in Fort Collins, that teachers would no longer have to work in a broken system, and that students who know true freedom, that students would know that we would have students who know that true freedom can only be achieved with an educated mind. So that, the name of the school really is a functional definition of what we're trying to accomplish. So these are some of the key books that we would expect parents to be familiar with, not on day one, but eventually if your kids are in the school. Cultural literacy is somebody mentioned E.D. Hirsch. This is where we started our discussion in our little group about where we ought to go with education. We started with the book over there on the left, Cultural Literacy. This is my copy from those meetings in the Everett's living room. So we all agreed that we all kind of went in the direction of this guy. E.D. Hirsch is from the University of Virginia. I'll speak about him a little bit later personally. But E.D. Hirsch was part of a nationwide research effort and a report called A Nation at Risk, and this was in the mid-'80s at some point in time. And the Congress funded this study. They wanted to get an accurate and no-holds-barred assessment of education in the United States of America. And Hirsch was on that panel. And Nation at Risk issued a very scathing commentary on the status of public schools. In fact, there's a paragraph that, reformers, education reformers like to point to, and I can't quote it verbatim, but I can paraphrase it accurately, and it said something on the order of, if the United States of America were deliberately attacked by foreign enemies who wanted to take our country down, they would design a public education system such as we have it today. And now everybody got mad about that, because here were these bigwig researchers from universities around the country came together, made all these nasty comments about schools, but nobody offered real constructive advice about what we ought to do about it. So Hirsch goes back to the University of Virginia. A few years later, he writes this book, Cultural Literacy. Explains the problem, but he also explains where we ought to go. And what he suggests is that Americans, that young people in America, all Americans, in order to maintain our republic, need to have a common common understanding about certain facts and certain principles and a certain philosophy about what it means to be an American and maintain the republic. And there are certain academic themes that all students should know. Now, for example, he speaks about the term Achilles heel. That if you're in a business meeting and the boss says, this competitive issue that we've got, this issue we're talking about today is the Achilles heel of our product in a competitive market. Well, he assumes that those two words, Achilles heel, are well understood by everybody in the room. There's an assumption that you know something about Greek mythology, so that you know the story of Achilles and why it is that his heel was the vulnerability. And how it was that vulnerability was remarkably exploited and led to the demise of Achilles. Right? So there's a language that we all speak. And there is an understanding from the standpoint of background knowledge, and that allows for inference, that we, to be successful, we all need to understand and assume everyone else understands. Newspaper reporters make these assumptions. I mean, go read today's Wall Street Journal. You will see story after story that assume, where you can see the writer assumes that the reader has sufficient background knowledge to put that story in context so that it means more. And if you don't have that context and you don't have that background, then you're just going to have some pretty straightforward words that tell you a little when you ought to know a lot by reading that story. And so Hirsch, half of this book is really a summary of that theory in far more eloquent detail. But the second half of the book is a list of things we all ought to know. I just went to the L's. So, lemmings to the sea, Lend-Lease, Lenin, Leningrad, Lens, Lent, Leonardo da Vinci, let me skip down, Liberty Bell, Library of Congress, Libya. Jumped over to this page. You should know St. Ignatius of Loyola, Lucifer, Luddite, Luftwaffe, Gospel according to St. Luke, Lunatic Fringe, Lusitania, thinking of Lusitania. You should know about Martin Luther. You should know about Lutheranism. Let me just jump to another section of the alphabet here. Let's go to the R's. You should know about relative humidity, relativism, Rembrandt, remember Pearl Harbor, remember the Alamo, remember the Maine. You should know render under Caesar the things which are Caesar's. You should know where Reno, Nevada is. You should know about reptiles, Republic, Republican Party, Requiem, resistance groups, on and on. These are things that by the time you get out of high school, in Hirsch's opinion, we should all have common understanding about what these terms mean so that we can have a conversation. And so it is. Well, you'll see how that translates into our curriculum. The Schools We Need is more of a strategic book about more of a, which I guess I don't have here. Oh, here it is. The Schools We Need, more of a strategic book about how to get the kinds of schools that Hirsch believes that we need. The Washington Core Knowledge School that is described here is featured in this book, by the way. We're pretty proud of that. That was the school with the asbestos attention. So he writes a couple pages about our success story there. The next book, Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong, is a book that we've used for years that informs our character education here in the school. We're going to get to those capstone virtues that were pointed out earlier in a bit, but that informs how we have the character expectations, behavioral expectations that we have here at the school, as well as the work ethic that we try to develop in our students. And this last book is the Core Knowledge Sequence. That's the curriculum. That's an older version pictured there. This is the version we have right here. It goes grade by grade, kindergarten up through 8th grade, Core Knowledge curriculum, K through 8. Okay? And every year is built and predicated on prior year's knowledge. So we teach, let's say, the Emancipation Proclamation to kids when they're in the 3rd grade, when they're learning about slavery and the end of the Civil War, but they're learning at a 3rd grade level, but they're taught in a way that gives them the building blocks, so when they pick that back up in the 7th grade, they can now engage in a deeper conversation about Reconstruction and a fuller understanding of how the country was torn in two, the economics of the Civil War as well as the human rights issues that were at stake, and they understand the politics of it as well. And so it's taught in a way so that teachers in subsequent grades can make assumptions about what a child knows and build upon that. And also, it allows some consistency. So, for example, if you are at Ridgeview and you're in the 3rd grade and you're in the core knowledge, using the core knowledge curriculum as they do over there, you might transfer over here or over to Trout. And if we're all teaching the core knowledge curriculum correctly, that child should be able to, allowing for maybe the school year might have started a week or two on different days, that child should be right where they need to be at the new core knowledge school. And same if they go to Virginia to a core knowledge school. You should be able to transfer into another core knowledge school and not miss a beat. So that's the curriculum. And then the parents get these books here. These are the books that you buy. We've got them in our libraries as well. So this is so for every grade level, parents should go buy this book. This is whatever, you can get it online also. Whatever the 5th grader needs to know. Any 5th graders here? Any 5th grade kids? You're in 5th grade? So what's your name? Samuel. I'm going to experiment with you. Is that all right? Okay. So when Samuel comes home from school, could be any of your kids. So Samuel, you're speaking for all the 5th graders in Fort Collins right now. When Samuel comes home from school and he sits down with his parents for dinner, and mom says, Samuel, what'd you learn at school today? Samuel gives the same answer every other kid in town gives. And what's the answer, Samuel? What'd you learn at school today? That's the answer. That's right. That is the answer. Nothing, or I don't know. That's the answer. That is the right answer. Congratulations, Samuel. That's exactly what every 5th grader would answer. Except if you come with it. Because your mom's going to have this book. And the mom's going to know where you're supposed to be in the sequence, the core knowledge sequence, and your mom's going to say, oh, well, Sam, who said I will fight no more forever? You should know that. That's Chief Joseph, right? Because you learned that. And you're going to have to know about the Battle of Little Bighorn. You're going to have to know about Custer. You're going to have to know about the Ghost Dance. That's in history. So let's flip over to something else. In music, you're going to be learning, I should be able to ask you, well, visual arts, you should be able to tell me about Raphael. You should be able to tell me about Renaissance sculpture. You should be able to tell me about the Northern Renaissance, Renaissance architecture. You should be able to tell me, let's see, American landscapes. And in music, you should be able to tell me about, how to get the math already. Well, you get the point. You should be able to tell me about rounding, subtracting integers, squares and square roots. You should be able to tell me about exponents and prime numbers. You should be able to compute at the level that we see here. So here's the thing, Samuel. It's a big conspiracy at the school. We are all in on this together, and we are all here to make sure that you're going to learn whether you want to or not. And the good thing is you're going to want to learn. You're going to want to learn. We do talk to each other, and we're all part of the same program. And not only that, this is a 5th grade book. Every 6th grade teacher knows what's in that 5th grade book. And every 5th grade teacher knows what's in the 6th grade book. So when your 5th grade teacher is teaching you something, you're not, when you ask the question, why do I have to learn this? Are we ever going to use this in life? The teacher can say, yes, next year, Miss Ricketts is going to expect you to know this so that she can teach you that. And it really is a beautiful thing. So you're starting to get an idea of why the school succeeds and how it is successful between just the market forces of having parents involved, having a curriculum that is very well designed and has been perfected over the last 15 or 20 years, and very well executed and implemented as it is here in the school. Curriculum works because it follows in a coherent sequence, because the knowledge that these kids are learning is very, very solid, that what we learn is specific. We don't ask kids too often to think of how, I don't know, well, you see them all the time. try to imagine what Shakespeare was trying to get across when he wrote this play. Well, we tell the kids what Shakespeare was trying to get across, and then we expect them to be able to see evidence of that. And we do it over and over and over again so that when they're in high school, and we ask these deep philosophical questions about Shakespeare or a particular philosopher or politicians or anything else, that they now have the background knowledge to and the mental training to be able to go through the sequences and steps to be able to add creativity to what they know and what's committed to their background knowledge. And so shared, get back to background knowledge, providing all students, regardless of their personal background, with the shared knowledge they need to be included in our national literate culture. E.D. Hirsch calls that mature literacy. When I was in school, the buzzword was functional literacy. If we can just teach kids how to read, they will know how to learn on their own. They'll read books about things that they ought to know. And all we got to do is teach them how to read and teach them how to read well. And so we read books about Dick, Jane, and Sally. Hopefully none of you have even seen those. You saw those? Dick, Jane, and Sally. And they were fun books for kids, I guess. There wasn't much of a plot to it, but the sentences like see, Dick, chase, the dog. What was it? Spot. See, spot, catch a ball. And it was just these sentences over and over again that we had to master. But there was no lesson in that. And so we want our kids to read for meaning. We want them to have, we want them to be functionally literate, but we want them to achieve this level of mature literacy so that they have the background knowledge, they can make the inferences, they have the context and to be able to participate in a grand conversation. So you've heard about the Common Core. And people ask about this all the time, and they think that we're a Common Core school here because we use a core knowledge curriculum, and the name of the school is Liberty Common. If we'd have known way back then that this was going to be the big thing to contend with, we'd have named the school something else maybe. But Common Core is a nationalized effort to establish a nationalized curriculum. Now the Common Core standards are only standards, is what people will tell you. And that is, states that agree to the Common Core standards are going to teach the same kinds of things in the same grades throughout the country. And that's the way it works. Colorado is a Common Core state. I was chairman of the State Board of Education when we decided to be a Common Core state. On a 3-4 vote, I was one of the 3. I was not for this. And the reason was, one, we tend to think, once again, mentioned in our philosophy, that education works best when you can localize it and make decisions as close to the kids as possible, which you might think means the school and our board, but that actually means your kitchen table. And the further away you get from Fort Collins, or this building, Fort Collins, the state of Colorado, the further away you get, the less likely the decisions are going to be in the best interest of our kids. And so moving authority to Washington, D.C., which is what happens here, is just something that just on its face didn't seem like a good idea. But then there's the details of the curriculum, the standards as well. And that is, it is not ambitious. It is an effort to be all things to all people. And what I mean by that is the direction of the theme of the Common Core standards are college and career readiness. Okay? So right away we're talking about certain standards that we don't advocate here at the school. And that's the career readiness part. So we're a college preparatory school. There's nothing wrong with career readiness schools or vocational schools as they're sometimes called. Nothing wrong with that at all. You have plenty of great options in town. It's just not what we do. We're more focused on just trying to do one thing well, and that is prepare our kids, not to get into college, that's pretty easy, but to thrive and succeed in college, which is very, very difficult, and it's a whole other level of expectations and achievement. And so if we're going to focus on not just getting our kids in and having them very well prepared, we've decided that we need to do that really well. And we need to not have in the school distractions from that mission of things like fashion design course, or auto mechanics, or agriculture technology, things of that sort. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. We have no argument with that. We just don't think you can do what we want to accomplish and that at the same time in the same building. And that's what this curriculum, these standards ask us to do. They're also skills-based rather than knowledge-based. And this is a core knowledge school. I've explained a little bit what the core knowledge curriculum is. So they're national standards, and then we are tested to those standards here in the state of Colorado. So we are required to be tested by these as well. We had never taught to the state standards. Before Common Core, with Common Core, or even before Common Core, we've never taught to the state standards. We score the best in the state on the state tests, but it's not what we teach. We teach the core knowledge curriculum and do everything we can to maintain fidelity to that. And all that means is that we teach what we teach very well, and it covers most of the state standards, but it's not sequenced. So when certain concepts in math are taught, we teach those concepts to our kids at different times. And sometimes ahead of time, sometimes after, just depending on it. And so we don't expect that we should be doing really well on these tests. We look at them for information and for some guidance to see if we can divine a message in the state standardized tests and we get them back. But we don't teach to that. And even on top of that. Oh, and then the level. If you live in Louisiana or Mississippi, where the performance of public schools is down at the bottom of the states and territories, Common Core curriculum might actually be an improvement, but it's not in Colorado. It is a mediocre set of standards, not ambitious. They're not uniquely college-oriented. They are for college and career readiness. They are skills-oriented as opposed to knowledge-based, which comports more with the classical curriculum I'm going to describe. So, yeah, we have the standards. We read them. We're aware of what's in there. We expect our teachers to know what those standards are. And we take the test. But we are not driven by those test results or or what the state expects us to teach. So, what do we teach? What does good education look like? And the answer is classical, and I'm going to describe that. It's impossible to describe it with the time we've got here today in great detail. So I've got these cool pictures from old classrooms. So there's a wise person teaching students. Knowledge transferring from the expert to the student. There is a conversation taking place. That is your sage on the stage, not necessarily your guide on the side. That is your sage on the stage. Information goes from that guy to that guy. And I don't know what that guy with the purse is doing over there. All right, here's Raphael's painting, School of Athens, which you see in the Vatican. And you probably recognize that, but let's take a closer look, and you probably recognize some of these people. So there's Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Pythagoras, Euclid, Ptolemy, and there they all are specifically. So here are all at least in Raphael's opinion, the wisest people who have ever lived in this one painting, as well as some mythical individuals. There's Lady Liberty right there. What are they doing? To give us a sense of where we're headed with classical education. Don't overthink this. The message is, they're all talking. They are having a conversation. These are wise people sharing information with other wise people. The only reason they're there is because they're wise, and they know who they ought to be hanging out with, and they can appreciate and recognize wisdom when they see it. And so they gather as a group, and they're talking, and they're teaching each other, and they're debating maybe, or whoever that guy is, he's just thinking and writing something down so somebody else can read it, like that guy. And so the point of this painting is that knowledge leads to the understanding of truth, beauty, and goodness when there's an exchange, when it's shared, when there's a discussion. Over at Ridgeview, they actually talk about the conversation, and the classroom setting is oriented around a Socratic discussion of what classical education means, about moving knowledge from one smart mind to the other, and constantly refining and improving and finding weaknesses and strengthening again from there. So this gives us more of a sense of what we mean about what classical education should look like. And by the way, we read here at this school, all the faculty, even the maintenance guys, get a book every year. So this year I bought, and I picked this book, Climbing Parnassus by Tracy Lee Simmons, a new apologia for Greek and Latin. So it's a discussion on why Greek and Latin instruction is so important for informing how we teach, not just English language acquisition, but everything we do, scientific method, and all education and the philosophy that goes along with it. So, I mean, we're spending a whole year reading this book to really help ourselves better understand what classical education is. I'm not going to be able to do this justice in the next 10 minutes. So I'm just going to, as I mentioned, I'm just going to show some generalities, but I would just urge you all to take it upon yourself to look on the internet, find a few articles about the virtues of classical education versus training. And if you're persuaded of that, then this might be your school. So what do we know right here? And this starts getting into how our classrooms are set up. So here's a classroom from the 1800s. What we know, just by looking at this and what we know by context, is that that lady right there is the teacher. She is in charge. She just looks like an expert by the way she's dressed and the way the classroom is set up. And what we know by history is she was taught in Greek and Latin in order to be a school teacher. And we know she was well taught in a variety of subjects in order to cover everything that she was expected to deliver in that classroom. Let's look at the students. What's missing in there, Samuel? What's missing in that picture? Recognize. Any students want to shout out an answer? What's missing? Young man. What's missing in that picture? There's no boys in that picture. It's not that boys are bad. The boys are probably next door. The idea being, back in the 1800s, mixing boys and girls in the same classroom was probably a distraction. Boys back there were a bigger distraction than they are now. Today, we handle it just fine. But back there, it made sense to put the boys in one classroom and girls in another classroom. What can we tell by looking at these girls? Well, they're well dressed. I don't know if that's wealthy people wore. It's probably just common middle class everyday attire. But they look like they came prepared to learn, and that they understand that they and their parents understand that this exchange in ideas is important enough to look nice and to not be a distraction themselves. Look at their desks. They got the same stuff in front of all of them. They're not learning at their own pace. They're not learning different things. They're all on the same page, learning the same stuff. They even got the same writing implements in the right hand. Look at their penmanship. They've been taught to hold their pens perfectly. So there is order. There is expectations. There is some uniformity. There are commonalities in how these girls are being taught in a classical setting. You can imagine the teacher doesn't teach from back there very often. She probably teaches from up here in the front. There's probably a chalkboard up there as well. They're all facing forward because that's where the expert is. Okay? Look at that. Same thing. That's Mr. Dudzinski. That is our sage on the stage. That's our content expert in English. He is the chairman of our English department. All the students are sitting in rows. We put the boys back in that picture, Simon. And you can see the girls are doing a fine job. And the boys are doing a fine job as well, paying attention despite the mixed genders in the room. But that is our sage on the stage. When we interview new teachers to come to Liberty, and we go to, as it's coming up, we're going to the University of Northern Colorado Job Fair, a peak-to-peak job fair, and then the CSU Job Fair to look for new teachers for whatever openings we're going to have. And we ask teachers, should a teacher be a sage on the stage or a guide on the side? 95% of them have been taught at these teacher colleges that the right answer is a guide on the side. And we don't agree with that. We believe the teacher should be the content expert, the sage on the stage. Their job is to transfer knowledge from one generation into the next and do it flawlessly. So, yes, there's plenty of exercises and teachers working right alongside students and asking them in the high school grades to pay attention and to think and to be creative, but we arm them with the background knowledge they need in order to be correctly creative and to even know what kinds of questions they should be asking, much less what solutions they ought to be proposing. This is a Spanish and French classroom. They're learning Spanish right there from Mrs. Tricola. She is the content expert. These textbooks were all selected and agreed upon by a panel of parents and school founders who constantly comb through our entire curriculum to make sure that what we're teaching is relevant, it's achieving our goals, that what we're teaching in history is related to what's being taught in economics and what's being taught in literature, and that it's sequenced throughout the school as well, so that when they're learning about Civil War and history, they're probably they ought to be learning at about the same time Civil War songs and plantation gospels, hymns from at the same time to put it all in context, and the art room would be supporting that as well. This is our Latin classroom. This is Mr. Kim. He's the foreign language department chair. He's got more of a conference table setting, but you can just see by the posture and plus I put the arrows in there. And that knowledge is transferring from student to teacher. In fact, I think that guy right there is, I think that's Will, who introduced you at the beginning of the meeting. Okay, all right, knowledge, academic rigor, and facts are good things. Yes, we believe in memorizing your math facts. We believe in memorizing key dates, key figures from history. Many people at the teacher colleges are persuaded that rote memorization is a bad thing. We believe it is a very good thing, especially in younger ages, that when kids are armed with math facts and formulas and historical dates and concepts, when they get to the creative stage of education in our thinking framework, they are far better prepared to engage in meaningful and deep and productive discussions, to be involved in that great conversation that is the essence and the goal of classical education. So let's talk about foreign language real quick. We teach Latin starting in kindergarten. Okay? Latin and Greek root words, but you're going to actually learn starting in kindergarten Latin vocabulary and some rudimentary sentences at that grade level. The reason we do this is the objective of our foreign language program at Liberty is to increase students' knowledge and understanding of English. This is why we hit the ACT reading and writing scores out of the park. This is why when we don't teach at the state standardized tests, on those English reading and writing scores, we are the best in the state of Colorado by the time these kids get into high school, and usually all the way through. This is our objective. So at the high school, we offer Spanish and French. We will only offer Germanic or Romantic languages here at the school. We will never offer, just given that philosophy, we are never going to offer languages that do not contribute to the English language improvement and understanding. So, our French students can carry on a conversation in French. Our Spanish students can carry on a conversation in Spanish. But it's taught from the standpoint of helping our kids have a better understanding of the similarities and the contribution to the English language of those two of those Romantic languages. You can see the similarities, and it is a very, very powerful combination and a philosophy. We're having a debate in the school right now of whether to bump that up from 7th grade to 8th grade, and so just something to be aware of. We have an academic advisory committee of parents. And they made that recommendation to our board of directors, and they're going to take several months to study that. And it's kind of a cool thing because they're holding meetings, and parents go out and do their own research and come back, and we have these very edifying discussions in the school community on an academic level of whether that would make academic sense for us. So that's just getting started here at the school. Why do we emphasize Latin? We access thousands of rich, nuanced words. It's the root of 90% of English words with more than one syllable. Strongest foundation for Romance language. It's the root for 80% of Italian, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Romanian. So we give our kids K through 7 in Latin. When they get into a Spanish and French classroom, our Spanish and French teachers love it because these kids are just learning these two languages at a very accelerated rate. And it's really a remarkable thing. And then a decoder for sciences and medicine. A quick side story for no time. So Dr. Bertram moved here with her family from Summit County 3 years ago, and she told me this. So she got her kids in Liberty, and she's a physician, and she told me that this great story. After the first year, her daughters were in Latin for 1 year at New, and so she was driving them home in the spring. Then some other Liberty kids in a carpool, and she gets a phone call about one of her patients, and she's on the phone speaking to another physician in doctor language, and she hangs up the phone, and the kids start asking her about the case because they understood what she was saying. And she says, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Well, that means red, and that means right, and that means this and that." And so she came in and she said, "After all these years going to medical school, I had to memorize all of these terms just from the textbook. I had no idea that if I'd only taken a little Latin, they could decode all these terms, and I would know what they mean." And here are kids after 1 year of Latin were able to carry on to what degree I can't certify, but we're able to at least understand where a phone conversation is going with the Dr. Moss. Latin is a discipline in addition to a language. The decoding instills logical and precise thought, which relates directly to English. And like math, it provides invaluable experience of studying one systemic subject all the way to mastery. So, and Latin students just generally score higher than modern language students on the ACT and SAT. I'll show you why we think we can verify that here.
I got a question.
Sure.
Can you elaborate a little bit about Latin? How is it taught? Do you converse in Latin, or is it?
There's some. You're a Latin student. You want to answer that real quick?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm in Latin 4 right now, and we do not converse during the class setting in Latin since it's a dead language, so obviously no converses in it right now.
Don't let Mr. Kim hear you.
Yes, exactly. But So we will read during class. We have a textbook. It's called Wheelock's Latin. And it has lots of old Latin readings and poems and all sorts of, it's a very large book. But we'll go through readings during the day. Most of the early Latin classes are all grammar, so that by around Latin 3 you can start getting into a little more advanced readings by Cicero, Ovid, different Latin authors. But yeah, so no conversing, but a lot of reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so classical education versus training. I've talked about this a few times today. Training, most of what public schooling is today, the teaching of skills that are oriented toward whatever jobs are seem to be in demand of employees today, versus a classical education which tends to be more timeless and goes all the way back to ancient Greek and ancient Rome. Classical education assumes that there are great things that have been discovered, great literature that exists. There are certain elements of humor and human nature that have never changed, and that it is to our advantage as individuals to understand that and to keep and refine that which is great and proven to be truthful and beautiful, rather than start all over year after year after year, or assume that education is about where we are here and today. So we take a 3,000-year view of what education ought to be, and we think it's much broader and much more empowering, and we actually think that it prepares our kids more for the world than being prepared for what we think is out there today, that is much of which is going to change by the time we graduate from college. All right, philosophy discussion. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Very useful with respect to the French Revolution, because you have the industrialization. The Industrial Revolution is taking place throughout the world. People are leaving the farms, they're coming to the big cities, they're starting to read on their own and get ideas on their own. And Rousseau comes to this notion that, which was very functional. It was part a philosophy about mankind and human nature that tried to explain these things and explain the world in a way that would allow nations and monarchies to maintain the loyalty of their subjects, to make sure French people still wanted to be French, to make sure that the Brits still wanted to be subjects of the crown. And he comes to the conclusion that human nature changes over time based on things in nature and the environment that changes around you. And if you take the time to understand what changes human nature, as a good leader, as a good monarch, as a good member of the intellectual elite, you could change different stimuli within a community or within a nation in order to steer individuals in certain directions. And now his philosophy had more to do with politics and civil society and economics, a little bit with education, but it applied very directly to education, because after all, if you can take that philosophy, when would be the best time to start changing the inputs of your subjects so that you can lead them in the direction you want them to be led? And now we're talking about schools. Now, during his time, not everybody went to school, but more people were starting to go to school. You wouldn't need to go to school in his day if your father was, let's say, a bricklayer. Because if your father was a bricklayer, you were going to be a bricklayer. And your kids were probably going to be a bricklayer as well. And your grandparents were probably bricklayers. And because that's the way skills and apprenticeships were passed from generation to generation, and you just became what you knew, what your environment was. And you wouldn't need to go to school to learn history and Greek and great languages if your lot in life was to be a bricklayer. And so the only people who went to school in Rousseau's day were the wealthy and the wealthy elite. But they started wanting an education, and so this philosophy became very useful, especially with that guy, Heinrich Pestalozzi. Pestalozzi was Swiss. He became the architect of the Prussian education system, the notion being that children should be taught from the very early age to be loyal Prussian subjects, to serve their state, And so it is today, whether it's the Prussian education system, it's from him we get the word kindergarten, for example. So it is today that when you think of Germans, I'm half German. I'm a quarter German, excuse me, Grandpa. Yeah, I'm a quarter German. And when you think of Germans, what do you think of today? German society, German economy, what do you think of? Anyone?
Highly skilled.
Yeah, highly skilled, precision engineering, you've got great technology. And why? Well, because that's what the Germans decided years and years ago, after World War I. That is how the German education system was oriented in order to maintain its economy and in order to maintain a great German citizenship, in order to sustain and maintain pride in all things German and so on. So the Germans today, this is where I make people mad. Germans even today, very, very good at knowing how to do a lot of things. What I would just suggest Americans are better at is knowing why. And it is a function of this philosophy, this Rousseau, Pestalozzi. This is the American extension of this philosophy. Anybody recognize that guy? You should. Parents, this guy's had more influence on our education than anyone else in America. This is John Dewey. He wrote his book in 1916. World War I was the turning point in American education. Prior to his time, if a teacher if you wanted somebody to teach history in your school, you would hire somebody with a history degree. If you wanted somebody to teach chemistry, you would hire somebody with a chemistry degree. Dewey makes a science. He makes a living. He makes a big mark on education by focusing on this Rousseau theory that human nature can be changed to do just what the title of the book says. To have education and democracy be part of the same set of objectives. Okay? After Dewey, what Dewey suggests is that it's not so important to focus on what students are taught and what they know in terms of actual subject matter and academic content. We also need to take as much time, if not more, to understand the psychology of youngsters, because not all kids learn at the same rate, at the same pace, and not all kids have the same interest, and not all kids have the ability to learn in the same way. And so the influence he had on me is when I was in the first, second, third, all the way up through sixth grade, as I can remember, we didn't read one book in the classroom, the Dick, Jane, and Sally book. There were 3 reading groups named after birds. So you were in the bluebird group, or the cardinal group, or the robin group. And the teachers would say, there's no difference between the 3. But we all knew, well, those are the really smart kids. These are the marginally smart kids in my group. Well, look at us. And everybody knew. And we would learn to read it different way. We were taught, and teachers began to be taught that kids learn in different ways. Some are tactile, some are auditory learners, some are visual learners. And so you need to come up with distinct strategies in order to deliver curriculum to different students in their classroom based on how they learn. And not only that, not all students are interested and inclined to learn about certain things. And so we need to ask questions from an early grade about what their aptitude is, what their interest and their orientation is. And that's why you have, in Germany, to this day, starting in the 3rd and 4th grade, the school and families sit down to make decisions about which direction you're going to go. Is it going to be math and science? Is it going to be the humanities? Is it going to be vocational? That makes perfect sense in a German society, even today. And so that's how they get the precision German engineering, because those kids have been trained for those jobs from the 3rd and 4th grade. I can't comment on their farming skills. They're probably good. All right. I imagine that's probably true. I mean, they're probably good at everything. Right? So with that philosophy and with that orientation toward education, the emergence of the Teachers College occurs throughout the country. And they pop up everywhere. And people love this. People going into education love the idea of the Teachers College and what is being taught at the Teachers College. Because it's a lot easier than learning Greek. It's a lot easier than learning Latin. It's a lot easier than learning Greek philosophy. And it makes intuitive sense to many, many individuals. And so it is today, if you want to teach in a public school, you've got to go to one of these teacher colleges, typically, and you've got to go get a teacher's license, and you've got to certify to the state that you know all about the classroom psychology that Dewey originated and has been perfected ever since then. And it is an education toward, and we like this word in America for some reason, an education toward a political objective, for instance. I don't think people don't often think about this. A political objective, and one that is more of a political strategy rather than a political statement. See, we don't pledge allegiance. I like to say this when people say, we need to go. I've got 3 kids who are warriors, and people say, well, they should go over and fight for democracy in Iran or Iraq or whatever it is. Really, democracy was such a good idea. Why didn't our founders create one? Because they didn't. They created a republic, which is different, and that's what we pledge allegiance to in the morning at the school. Democracy is a strategy. It's just how we collectively make decisions. But the goal, Dewey's goal here, is just as it says, and that is to consider the American democracy and the needs and the goals and the objectives of the country, and children ought to be taught in a way that helps them be strong and loyal supporters to a political strategy. And listen, I love America. I've sworn oaths to it over and over again. I've stood by and cheered when my kids signed up to go put on uniforms in the profession of arms, and I love the country. But the purpose of a republic is to protect the rights of individuals, not the other way around. And that's why the country is so great. It's because we are more important than even our great country. And the reason our country succeeds is because we've always understood that until we were taught otherwise, starting in 1960. And today, that guy right there has the most influence on your kids probably, National Center on Education and the Economy. Mark Tucker is kind of the architect of, I mentioned the Common Core curriculum earlier. He's the architect of that, really. It's been kicked around for years. It really didn't catch on until Bill Gates started putting hundreds of millions of dollars behind it to get Common Core standards, to lobby it, and also get them adopted by states. There was an assessment I mentioned, this PARC assessment, Colorado. All of our kids are taking this now, starting this year. It's a consortium of about 20 other states. The assessment on what we are supposed to teach our kids is not designed in Colorado. Just 5 years ago, when I was chairman of the State Board of Education 3 years ago, and when I was there, if you were to call me and say, Bob, I don't like the way these CSAP and TCAP tests are designed, or how they work, or the information I get, or even the questions of the test, I could do something about that as your elected representative. Members of the Board of Education now, including the Commissioner of Education, because of copyright restrictions, are not even allowed to read this exam. Okay? Our top state officials don't know what's in the test. And all we know is that it's aligned with the Common Core standards. And we hear stories after our kids take it, and they tell us about what they say was in it and so on. But we don't really know. And it's probably not devastating, but the question is it good? Does it move us in the direction we think we ought to be moving in for our kids? And what I certainly know is that it does not measure the effectiveness of teaching a classical liberal arts curriculum. National teacher standards and certification, race to the top, is a federal financial giveaway if you do certain things that the Department of Education wants to see happen in your states, like then you get your money back from Washington. The No Child Left Behind Act is passed under George W. Bush, and you can get out of it if you agree to race to the top, new standards. It's really a nightmare. Here's some buzzwords. I mentioned these teachers, by the way. We do not require our teachers to be licensed here at Liberty. We do expect them to be content experts in their subject matter, and we interview them on that basis. We've got a lot of college professors. As you walk around the school tonight, you're going to see a lot of PhDs on the names on the doors. Those are usually college professors that came to teach at Liberty. We're not going to ask them to go get a teacher's license. What we care about is whether they know their subject matter. We coach them as administrators and as a school community, and we've got a leadership structure within our faculty and staff. So there's a lot of collaboration going on to perfect our classroom delivery, and we read lots of books on this together as a school, and we measure and assess and make sure we're constantly improving. But it does not matter to me if somebody went to a teacher's college to become a teacher. When we want a science teacher, we hire somebody with a science degree. The head of our science department teaches chemistry. Her degree is in chemistry. History instructors is one like that, too. Their degrees tend to be in history. Mr. Kemp's degree is in Latin. And so we're not required as a charter school to hire licensed teachers. And even the state of Colorado, and minutes if the license doesn't guarantee you anything. All right, buzzwords that you should run away from that are signals of the Rousseau-Dewey model of this progressive romantic notion of education. You can see the list right there. One of the big ones you see a lot of is child-centered education. That means you build an education around the child's interests. Well, it sounds good because who doesn't want children to be the center of our universe? And all these kids want to be the center of our universe. You are our universe at home, not necessarily the school system. And so, we're here to educate them, but what they learn is not a function of what they're interested in or what they think is important at any given point in time. We're the adults and the experts, and we guide them in that general direction. Critical thinking skills is another kind of a cop-out in education. It sounds so good, and of course everybody wants to think critically. Critical thinking skills turns into a curriculum where we teach kids how to do research and surf the internet so they can go find the information that they might want when they want it. We don't think that's actually learning. We don't think that's teaching. We want them to be armed as a function of memory and at the tips of their fingers with the content knowledge that they need to engage in a good debate, to engage in writing a great essay and a great paper, or if they're writing an essay in English class, to have the historical background to be able to write that English paper very, very well. So, you see any of these words? You should run from them, unless you are not agreeing with anything you're hearing. Right? Here's a good example. This is pretty recently. So this is just just a few months ago. This is a flyer that was sent out to all the education people, and we get these things too. It's a seminar taking place in Denver that a lot of teachers went to. Here are the two key paragraphs. Let's break these down real quick. Traditionally, teaching techniques emphasize instruction as the most worthwhile use of class time. That's what we do here. Through the ages, teachers have been taught to combine lecture with study time and homework to achieve math comprehension. That's what we do here. Yet, consider this. Low stakes testing with immediate feedback shows vast improvement without additional study time. It's called the test effect. You've got to see it to believe it, and people pay a lot of money to go see it, and a lot of people believe it. This low-stakes testing strategy is kind of what's taking place in public education today. So if you go to the conference, you would have gained a deeper understanding of testing from the science of learning perspective. You would learn the simplest way to achieve the largest gains for your students on state tests. You would refine your techniques on what kind of feedback to give your students and why, again, relating to the tests. And you would be able to help your students self-monitor, reflect on problem solving, and see how this strategy applies to any student at any level. There's the key right there. That public education in Colorado and throughout the country, and it's not that people are just wanting to do bad things with our kids and in schools, but this is becoming the goal of education in Colorado and throughout America, is get your kids to do well on these state standardized tests, which are broad. They're not focused on what you might want, which is to be able to thrive in college, and not focused on, and then they're not ambitious. They're not, the Common Core standards are not internationally benchmarked, by the way. And, there's great risk, in my opinion, that after years and years of this experiment, our kids are going to be in a place we don't want them to be as parents, and we can't get them back by then. So we stick with what works. And it has worked for 3,000 years. We really invent nothing here at this school. So getting back to classical education, which I'll talk about now, and start turning it over toward our finish here, and our philosophy. So we are more persuaded by this philosopher, John Locke. John Locke also considered human nature. He came to the conclusion that human nature never changes, that kids in ancient Greece and ancient Rome were motivated by the same things kids are motivated by today, that our families and our relationships to our spouses, to our own children, to our parents, really haven't changed. Sure, technology has changed, language has changed, things around us has changed, but human nature, in Locke's opinion, doesn't change. It is a great constant. It is set in motion that way as a function of nature. And we are a part of it. He comes up with a term, you've seen many of these terms attributed to John Locke, tabula rasa. And this gets back to the bricklayer. Because if your dad was a bricklayer and his dad was a bricklayer, you're probably going to be a bricklayer too in these days. And he comes to the conclusion that nobody should be bound or confined to these environmental stimulus that is around them, or what rut they might have been stuck in. Since human nature is the same, the lowest one in society should, given the right opportunities to go to school, to be literate, to be healthy, to live in a decent house, should be able to accomplish the same things as those whose existence has always been in the upper class. And you should have the ability, that tabula rasa literally means clean slate. You should be able to have a clean slate and become whatever your inclination, whatever you're willing to work for. That we all have this notion of being born equal. Okay? The Founding Fathers really latched on to Locke as well as some other philosophers, and they didn't entirely discard Rousseau either, by the way. He had some fine things to say. Well, Rousseau comes after the American Revolution, but you see some of these words: natural law, natural rights to life, liberty, and property. These make it into our Declaration of Independence and become the essence of America's political culture and how we organize ourselves. The notion that we are all created equal, and that these things prove themselves. They prove themselves because we are a being in the state of nature, and some of these things are so obvious that reasoned and rational people can come to these conclusions about the human condition. And so this helps explain from an education perspective how it is that we expect Will and his other students in Latin 4 and AP Latin to be able to appreciate the logic and the literature of Ovid and see parallels in other ancient writings, Iliad and Odyssey, and you begin to see, even today, reading one of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is still humorous to us, because the interplay between individuals has not changed. Human nature is the same now as it was way back then. And you see that developed in Milton and Shakespeare, to the point today you can turn on your television set and still see these same themes that work. And why do they work? They're still funny. They still make us cry over a great tragedy. We still cheer for the great triumph when good overcomes evil. And why? It's because these themes still make sense, because human nature really does not ever change. And so we here at Liberty, we're more persuaded by John Locke and with the founders of the country as well. We thought this was a good basis not just for education, but for establishing a republic too. So Albert J. Nock, after World War I, he starts seeing where Dewey's taking the country, and Nock was more of a philosopher. And University of Virginia, this becomes significant here in a second. He comes to the conclusion that these teachers' colleges, bad idea. This notion that the content experts are no longer the primary teachers in schools, bad idea. The idea that kids are no longer learning Greek and Latin, and they're no longer learning about ancient history and Western civilization, bad idea. And he comes to the conclusion that if we had to assemble our nation's greatest leaders to come up with something heroic and remarkable, we would not be able to do it anymore. And he talks about the founders. And he said, what allowed all these individuals from different countries who assembled in the 13 colonies and had different economic and religious interests to assemble in Philadelphia and meet, month after month, week after week? How was it that they were able to come together and create the great document of our Declaration and launch a revolution? And the reason was they all had a common level of understanding. They all learned in Latin and Greek. They all understood, and they all knew the same important time periods in history. They understood the same philosophers, and they were able to have not just a spirited conversation, but an actual meaningful conversation about the human condition and about mankind, to understand what kind of nation we would build around that in order to sustain prosperity and freedom. It's the greatest experiment in the history of human civilization. And so Nock laments that it would be impossible to assemble these kinds of people in his day. And this is the book he wrote to propel that idea, Theory of Education in the United States. And he talks about how we need to get back to education, and that we need to avoid this notion of training until a certain time in the child's development, which is well after high school. So, University of Virginia, we're still there because Hirsch is impressed by Albert Nock, and it has an influence on Hirsch's outlook and his research and his understanding of sociology, economics, politics, and the philosophy of education. So after all the writing the books and so on, he starts the Core Knowledge Foundation. The foundation is the agency that maintains, keeps the books current, constantly updates them, does the research to make sure it's being taught the way it should, and to make adjustments. And so this curriculum is not set in stone. The philosophy is, but there's new things to learn every year. So that's constantly being added to the curriculum over time. So our metaphor, the philosophy we use around the school here is that education is a journey. We talk about the journey all the time. The notion that the journey gets harder every day, but you're able to accomplish more and more, and able to accomplish more heroic challenges that lie in front of you, and you actually begin to enjoy it when you realize how much you are achieving and accomplishing, and that the journey doesn't end when you get your diploma. Your journey continues on through college and through life, and we try to get our kids in that frame of mind so that they view themselves as serious learners. Which brings us back to the universal truth of education. It's the right responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. If you are one of those individuals who at this point is persuaded that you could drop your kids off at the front door here at the elementary school and somehow they will come home smarter, I want to assure you that is a strategy that will not work, and this probably is not your school. Okay? And we want you to make the best decision. We want us all to be happy. And so you won't hurt her feelings if you get up and leave, or if you just decide this is not your school. We don't try to be all things to all people. We try to do what I'm describing here as well as anybody can, and I believe we're succeeding. So classical liberal arts, we've talked about that. Here's a quick definition. It denotes curriculum that imparts general knowledge and develops students' rational thought and intellectual capabilities, unlike the professional, vocational, technical curricula emphasizing specialization. The Common Core curriculum is trying to do this and knowledge, and it does neither very well. Contemporary liberal arts comprises the study of literature, languages, philosophy, history, mathematics, and science. Here's the mission statement of the school. It's to provide excellence and fairness in education through a common foundation. This is achieved by successfully teaching a contextual body of organized knowledge of the values of a democratic society and the skills of learning. In short, we teach common knowledge, common virtue, common sense. That is the motto of the school, by the way. Our mission statement was developed on the following set of principles. And I violate all the rules of PowerPoint presentations starting now, because my board forced me to do it. They want everybody to understand our 7 principles. I'll read through fast and read right along with you. Number 1, children yearn for meaning and require a basis of solid contextual common knowledge for the development of mature literacy. That's that term I mentioned that E.D. Hirsch says is different, far superior than just functional literacy. And critical thinking for growth and communication in a diverse society. Number 2, the educational playing field between students of differing backgrounds should be level to provide all students a basis upon which they can build further knowledge and develop the skills necessary to communicate and succeed. This is important for us. They're all important for us. You will see this actually just during the course of the school day, and I urge you to come and wander through the school when we're in session and have your kids do spend a shadow day here. We have a dress code which is designed to help so that you walk down our hallways and you're going to be passing kids from extraordinarily wealthy families as well as kids from extraordinarily poor families. Our goal is to make it so that you can't tell the difference in how they're dressed and how they behave and in what they know. And we succeed in that, by the way. So, number 3. The skills of learning, reading, writing, speaking, calculating, and thinking are most meaningfully learned from a combination of knowledge or content of the curriculum, modeling, coaching, and sensible practice. Number 4, to thrive in work and citizenship and in personal growth, children must be taught the values of a democratic society. These values include, among other things, respect for others, their property and their rights, responsibility for actions, honesty and social justice, resourcefulness, being ready to learn, to serve, and to share. 5, inclusiveness is fundamental in responding to the diverse needs of children and raising academic standards. All parents, regardless of economic status, should be free to choose this educational program for their children. Number 6, teachers are professionals, and this implies considerable autonomy, mastery, and independence. Having accepted the academic and philosophic mission of the school, the teacher needs to be free to exercise informed judgment in order to fulfill his or her primary role as an educator. And number 7, principal determinants of individual academic success are individual ability and effort. And the policies of liberty, grading, discipline, homework, and teaching must support the student's adoption of a personal quest, it's the journey, for academic growth using the clearly marked path of expectations and knowledge, skill, and character. The guiding philosophy of liberty acknowledges that children can and should be held accountable for their own schoolwork and behavior with the support of teachers and their parents. The school, we'll get into the last details of the school, it's tuition-free, public school. It's run by parents, chartered high school and elementary school, chartered by the Clear School District. Literacy, the development of literacy will be one of the primary aims and focuses of effort in the school, particularly in the early grades. The school will emphasize reading and more reading. We ask kids, we have reading lists we ask your kids to stick to over the summer. When you are throughout the school year, grades K through 8, your kids have reading logs with books that they need to be reading off of a list. They can pick anything they want as long as it's on the list, and it's a long list. And that list is refined and reviewed by our academic advisory committee, so that's classical and that relates to what we're teaching here at the school. And so you'll sign off every night that your son or daughter has read for a half hour that they're very young grade that you have read with them. And we expect kids to read a lot. We use phonics-based strategy, lots of practice. We want parents working with their kids every day. Mature literacy, this again, I've talked about this a lot, develops as a student becomes acquainted with a broad, rich body of knowledge and becomes familiar with many well-written, diverse, and meaningful works of literature. We like our kids discussing books and characters from great literature. So we have reading lists, we have summer reading programs. We are at high school again, when we talk about classical education at the high school level, we accentuate the classical liberal arts curriculum here. We do emphasize math, science, and engineering. We do that very well here at the school. We make the highest math scores in the entire state of Colorado right down this hallway. And between math, economics, which we start in kindergarten, and our science instruction is just a powerful confluence of those three topics, and that all comes together in the engineering classroom. We have one required engineering course, that's your one semester your sophomore year. And after that, all the engineering is elective. And we have a small school environment. I talked earlier about why we won't get much bigger. As a college preparatory school, we sufficiently prepare students to thrive at any selected university and to pursue any career they wish. Selective university is a buzzword. That means you're at most competitive universities, and we expect our faculty and staff to be in touch with selective universities throughout the country, as well as our administrative crew, Mrs. Stoltz, who we here in a minute. We expect that, and we work very hard to understand what those standards are and make sure we're doing everything we can to give our kids all academic advantages to get into those kinds of schools. We have legitimate content experts. These are the best teachers in America. Her degree is in history. Her degree is in foreign language instruction. She's from Chile and teaches Spanish. That is our art instructor, Miss Ellis, best art teacher in America. Her degree is in art, her master's degree from Rhode Island School of Art and Design. Miss Timby is the chemistry instructor and department chair. She also went to Liberty, and her degree is in chemistry. All right, don't pay any attention, or don't try to read all these numbers too much. But here's grades 3 through 10 over there: reading, writing, math. This is the state standardized test, which we do not teach to. Everything in green is number 1 in terms of performance in the Clear School District. We do pretty well by not teaching in that test. We just take it. Other results, these are all bragging rights here. It's based on, I'm going to be boastful about the school, let you know that I think what we do is work. National Charter School of the Year, nationally recognized Blue Ribbon School. This is 2 actually. We just won 2 more state championships last weekend. And we're going to world competitions now. Presidential fitness champion past 7 years. We're top 1% of all middle schools. And we're number 1 of all high schools in Colorado, according to ColoradoSchoolGrades.com. Results, we received the Governor's Distinguished Growth Award every year since the inception. That's that banner up there. 2014 is still in my office. We need a big ladder to get up there. And then the John Irwin, these awards here, the John Irwin School of Excellence Award we've won every year since the inception of the award. And that's rare. That's not normal for schools. So the certificates are actually right in the office here. Take a look at them if you like. And it was great fun when I was chairman of the State Board of Education for 7 years, because the chairman needs to sign a certificate. So if I was principal here for my day job and I volunteered to do the State Board of Education, I had to get elected, so those of you voted for me, thanks. And but I got to sign the certificate myself. It's kind of cool. So we received the Colorado High School Academic Growth Award this year. That was there